Welcome to Keith Knight Don't Tread on Anyone and the Libertarian Institute podcast. Today, I am joined by Kristan Hawkins. She is the president of Students for Life Action and Students for Life. She's also the host of the Explicitly Pro-Life podcast. Find her at KristanHawkins.com. Links will be in the description below. Miss Hawkins, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me today, Keith.
Of course, I saw so many of your videos on YouTube, so I wanted to give you what I have found to be the top 10 most compelling pro-choice questions. Now, before we get into that, you had a great question where you had asked someone to explain what an abortion is. And it was interesting that this pro-choice advocate was not able to define it, to which I said, well, maybe I need to embrace some humility. Maybe I don't know what it is. Please tell us, before we go through the argument, so we're on the same page, what does it mean to have an abortion?
Sure. Well, there's different types of abortion depending on the development of the child, how old the child is in utero. The most common type of abortion is committed in the first trimester. And that type of abortion will either be used would be a DNC procedure, a dilation curettage procedure, a suction abortion, or an abortion pill would be used. Pills would be used to end the pregnancy and end the life of the child. A DNC procedure where a looped shape curette is inserted into the woman's vagina, into the birth canal, into the uterus, and it is used to scrape the lining of the uterus where the new organ that is forming, that the child actually self-directs, the placenta, and the child is attached to the uterine wall, and this removes the child from the uterine wall, and then the abortionist is able to just basically shove the pieces of the placenta and the child out. Suction aspiration abortion, they use a long shaped cannula. It's about 12 times more powerful than your household vacuum cleaner suction. Same idea. The cannula goes up through the mother's birth canal into the uterus, and the child and the placenta is just sucked out. The abortion pill, with the chemical pill abortions, these are very dangerous abortions. This is something that the abortion industry has been really using COVID as an excuse to push through. And with the help of the Biden administration, they've been able to take all the risk evaluation mitigation strategies away from these pills. This is something that Bill Clinton and his administration had assigned with the use of these pills because they have been linked to death in women. These are now the most common type of first trimester abortion. The first pill is taken, it's supposed to be taken in the abortion clinic after the abortionist has confirmed pregnancy. Since December, that isn't the case. They don't even have to confirm that she's pregnant. They don't even have to confirm the location of the pregnancy to make sure she's not experiencing a life-threatening ectopic pregnancy. She can take the first pill at home. The first pill starves the child. It stops progesterone, the hormone, from getting to the child, which allows the child to grow. And then the second pill is taken a few days later, and that is a pill that basically starts the abortion. It starts the contractions they starts the contractions, and over a period of days and weeks, she has the abortion at home. And we call them toilet bowl abortions because she is advised by the abortion clinic to, when she gets really heavy cramping and bleeding, just to go on the toilet bowl, not to look, and to keep flushing. So that's the first trimester. Second trimester abortions are D&E, dilation and evacuation abortions. They still have that curette, that loop-shaped device, but what they do after softening the cervix, they can go into the cervix with a Sofer clamp, and this clamp goes in and grabs pieces of the child. The child is in breech position, so the feet are grabbed first. So a leg, an arm, then the trunk, so the midsection of the child, and the abortionist is advised to grasp the fetal part, twist, and pull. And then finally, the head will be the last part. And so that is actually how the child is literally dismembered in these types of abortions. And you don't have to believe me. You can go to National Abortion Federation. Up until I know a couple years ago, the last time I was on their website, they actually spelled out how to commit these abortions right on their website. After that, after these, what they think all the parts are pulled out of the mother, the child is dismembered. They insert the curette, scrape the lining of the uterus, and the goal is to make sure they get the placenta and any other parts of the child to reduce the risk of sepsis or infection. That's a second trimester abortion. The third trimester abortions do happen. Some people, it's funny, on campuses will like to argue with me that third trimester abortions don't happen, but I literally know the people who do them. I can tell you where their abortion facilities are. You can go to Google and type in 9-month or 8-month abortion, and you will find Dr. William Hearn in Boulder. There's a clinic, Southwest Women's, in Albuquerque, New Mexico. There's there's Dr. Carhart, who's outside of Omaha and outside of Washington, D.C. These abortions, the most common type of abortion for a third trimester now is, we call them heart attack abortions. Using ultrasound guided technology, the abortionist will try to get as close to the heart as possible. And they have a syringe, long needle, very similar to the needle they use in amniocentesis. And they will inject potassium chloride or a drug called digoxin into the child, the goal of which is to produce a cardiac arrest, a heart attack in the child. After that is done, they will insert seaweed sticks, Lumeria, into the woman's vagina to soften her uterus. Her birth canal, and her cervix, and she will go back to the abortion facility 2 to 3 days after, and then the thought being that her cervix is ripe, and then they can just kind of pull the child out. She will deliver a dead child. That is the most common today version of how they commit a third trimester abortion.
Let's get into the top 10 pro-choice claims here. Her body, her
Okay.
choice. A woman is an autonomous being, and bodily autonomy is a basic human right. A fetus, which is biologically dependent on the mother for sustenance, has yet to acquire bodily autonomy, as it cannot self-govern due to this dependence. A fetus is not its own being. Her body, her choice. What do you say?
Okay, it's always funny how people who constantly demand that we follow the science, or that we don't follow the science, but yet when it comes to this actual argument, literally deny the science, literally deny that a child is, in fact, its unique whole human being that has its own body, and actually you could argue has its own autonomy for their body. Yes, that child's body is located inside of her body, but he or she has her own bodily autonomy. This is a medical fact that the child is actually a separate individual, a separate human being with his or her own sex, his or her own DNA, his or her own blood type. When I was pregnant with my children, with my boys, I suddenly did not become a man, even though inside of my womb there were growing male genitalia. That my body didn't change. My child's body was developing into a male body. This doesn't work at all. And when you often you hear this argument from those who advocate for abortion, they're using it simply to say a woman can do anything she wants with her body, which actually is not true. We don't actually accept that across our country as well. My children have some life-threatening genetic illnesses. You cannot go into a pulmonary ward at a children's hospital and start smoking and say, well, it's my body, my choice. No, because when you start taking actions with your body that threaten the lives of other bodies, the government has said, yeah, we can stop you from doing that. Also, this idea that the fetus can't self-govern, doesn't actually hold weight unless you're willing to accept that infanticide should also be legal. Because the moment he or she emerges from the birth canal, do you think the fetus, now the infant, can now self govern? What has changed? All that has changed in that child is their location. That little boy or girl is still completely dependent on their mother for survival. And the mother would be held at that point criminally liable for the child's death if she neglects the responsibilities towards caring for her child, or fails to place her child with an adoptive family, or utilizes safe haven laws, which allow her to freely give her child to state authorities, no questions asked.
Pro-choice claim number 2. What we're dealing with is mostly first trimester abortions in which this child you speak of is really just a microscopic clump of cells, not a living, breathing human being with thoughts, emotions, goals, and desires. Therefore, an abortion is not killing a person.
Hmm. Being human is the only criteria that makes sense for you having the right to life protected in a just society. And it becomes very much a slippery slope when you start saying you have to be human plus, you have to be a human being and have this quality or this functional ability. When you start saying that, you start eliminating other groups of human beings who have already been born. And you don't have to look very far back in the history of our world, even in the history of our nation, to see when it wasn't enough just to be a human being. But if you were a human being and your skin was darker than others, somehow that justified other people being allowed to own you. Or in history, when we look back to the disabled, saying, if, well, you're a human, but your IQ level falls below this number, therefore, that gives the state the right to do a hysterectomy on you without you or your parents' consent, so you can never procreate. We have all uniformly, as a society, said those things were wrong, and we should never go back to those moments. But that's exactly what we do when it comes to the preborn. Fundamentally, at the moment of conception, when the egg from the mother and the sperm from the father unite, so those are two parts. When those two parts unite, a whole unique human being comes into existence that's never existed before and will never exist again, with a wholly unique DNA code. That is the moment that human life begins. It's the moment when your human life began. And to start saying, well, you have to be able to breathe, or you have to be able to experience a certain emotion, or you have to be able to have certain thoughts. That's not much different from saying you have to have a certain skin color, or a certain sexual orientation, or a certain level of ability or an IQ. The preborn child is a human being, is a member of our species. That's really the only box that needs to be checked.
Forcing a child into the world to unwanted parents will lead to mass misery and much more crime than would otherwise exist because parents aren't there to properly rear the child.
Mm. The solution to suffering has never been to eliminate the potential sufferer. It's to mitigate the suffering. I would say a society where it's simply a status quo to kill someone who we deem might suffer, or who our data or stats might say or might indicate that might lead a criminal enterprise at one point, or might end up in jail. I think that's going to lead to a more miserable society as a whole. And I think that gets, once again, into a very slippery slope. And I think this is really this is framed a lot as compassion, that we are so compassionate as a society that we have decided who is going to suffer. And therefore, we are just going to snuff them out of existence before they're born. I think this is a really veiled way of abdicating responsibility. And it's really, quite frankly, laziness to say we're just going to absolve ourselves of the responsibility to seek social justice with with a family or a woman or a child. We're going to absolve ourselves from responsibility to fix this problem by just killing you and snuffing you out of existence.
Mandating that a woman needs to be a mother if she doesn't want to is equivalent to enslaving her. Slavery is immoral. Therefore, forcing a woman to have a baby and perform at least 18 years of labor for the child is akin to forced labor and slavery.
Sorry, I'm gonna try not to laugh at you. Okay, so this is really interesting because unless unless you're talking about cases of sexual assault, which 1% of all abortions are committed because of sexual assault or incest or because the life of the mother is at stake, which I always find to be, interesting because they always bring these cases up when justifying their extremist views for 100% of all abortions. But I've never found anyone to say, yes, I'm just in favor of abortion, just these terrible circumstances, but everything else, I will work with you to ban abortion. No one ever says that. The left just uses these terrible circumstances, these extreme circumstances to justify 100% of all abortions. And so we hear this female slavery argument sometimes, but unless you're talking about sexual assault, unless you're talking about incest, you're talking about a woman who has engaged in a behavior that the natural biological consequences are the creation of a unique whole human being. I talk a lot about taking responsibility on campuses. That no one in the pro-life movement, ever argues or advocates for limiting how many people you can have sex with or what type of sex you can have. Our argument is that if you engage in heterosexual sex, that you acknowledge you're engaging in a behavior that has consequences. And one of those consequences can be the creation of a unique, whole, living human being. And I think that's a really important point there. There's also an important point that no pro-lifer is uh, advocating that a woman be forced to parent her child. Every single state has a safe haven law that which allows a mother to surrender her child within a certain time period after birth. That time period varies from state to state, can be 48 hours, 72 hours, even longer, with no questions asked, no criminal repercussions. If she doesn't want to utilize a safe haven law, she also has the option of creating a closed adoption plan where a child is adopted into a family and she will never ever be in contact with that child or that child's family again. She can also make an open adoption plan where she places a child with a family of her choice and can actually remain active in her baby's life based on conditions that she sets aside. Um, I think that is just an argument that is used to basically get attention, and it certainly doesn't work when it comes to parents of children who are older than toddlers either. If I decide at 2 years old that my child is too much of a burden, I got a new promotion at work, I really just can't handle being a parent of a toddler anymore. No one would say I was justified in drowning my toddler in the bathtub. Everyone would say that that was murder. I could argue that I was forced to be a parent, even though at 2 years old I decided, "Nah, no more." But the state and our just society would say, no, you accepted that responsibility. And part of responsibility of being a parent is not killing your child.
Abortion will exist either way, whether it's legal or illegal. If it's illegal, we'll have back alleys and coat hangers and very unsafe for both the baby and the woman. But If abortion's legal, it will be safe, legal, and rare. Actually, they've dropped the rare now that it's been 60 million. So actually, it will be much safer for the woman, both mentally and the child. It'll be quick and over. Therefore, abortion should be legal.
Yeah, I mean, at first I'd say this logic is very inconsistent. I don't see the abortion lobby calling for rape or murder or bank robbery to be decriminalized, even though it would be more convenient and it would spare the lives of the perpetrators. The whole point of laws is to protect the victim who could otherwise, who those otherwise would violate them. Bank robbery is a very high risk profession if you choose to be a bank robber. But no one says, well, we need to make it legal so bank robbers don't get killed. I would go back to also your myth that legal abortion means safe abortions, or that by making abortion illegal, the argument we often hear is that tens of thousands of women will die every year from illegal abortions. We know from Dr. Bernard Nathanson, who was a co-founder of NARAL, Pro-Choice America, who was an abortionist committing legal abortions in New York State in the late 1960s, as New York was one of the first states to legalize abortion, that is just a myth, that he actually admitted later in life in the 80s when he became pro-life, that they made up the myth that tens of thousands of women were dying from illegal abortions. But you don't have to trust Bernard Nathanson because he became pro-life. Go to Christopher Tietz. Christopher Tietz was Planned Parenthood's very own award-winning. He won their highest honor, the Margaret Sanger Award, the award named after the eugenicist who founded Planned Parenthood in 1974 for his statistics research. Christopher Tietz researched the death rate of women who were seeking legal and illegal abortions in the years before and after Roe versus Wade was handed down by 7 men in 1973. In his estimation, in 1965, the number of women who died from legal and illegal abortions was under 1,000 women. You have Mary Calderon, Planned Parenthood's own medical director, in the 1950s, who came out to write that her estimation, 90% of abortions were being committed by physicians who she called in good standing in their community, meaning, they were just your family doctor who did abortions on the side for his side hustle but didn't advertise it. Both she and Tietz wrote in the late 40s and 50s that the threat for women dying from abortions was actually very low because of the invention of penicillin antibiotics, because the highest risk to women, especially before ultrasound, was infection or sepsis.
Final question. Thank you so much for being generous with your time, Ms. Hawkins. If a woman is raped, let's say, well, this is about 1% of abortions. Okay, well, then
Mhm.
we could still say this is a lot of potential suffering. And this poor woman now sits for months on end with this rapist baby in her
Mhm.
stomach who she's now giving birth to. This is one of the worst cases scenario. What if a woman is raped, then is abortion morally justified?
Hmm. Rape is a horrific crime, and rapists should be found and they should be punished to the fullest extent of the law. If she is raped, she's going to need two things: support and justice. Support, she's going to need in every way: emotional, physical, psychological, because rape is a horrific trauma. It's one I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. It's a crime to violate a woman's body. And also, it's a crime to make her pregnant without her consent. And the pro life movement does stand ready to support women who've survived sexual assault. If you research the pro life movement, we have more than 3,000 pregnancies help centers already in existence, have been supported and sustained in our communities for nearly 50 years. Abortion, simply gets rid of the evidence of the crime. It gets rid of the inconvenience of having to stand with her and support her for an extended period of time. I actually find this to be a very um, lazy argument from the left that, oh, if she's raped, she can just have an abortion. Having an abortion isn't going to end the trauma that she's endured. In fact, this is a lifelong pain that she will experience. But it's almost like a check the box situation of, oh yeah, I help women who have been raped. I've advocated for abortion. There you go, done. I've done my social justice work. I've stood in solidarity with her. I think it's very lazy to push another act of violence upon a woman who's just experienced an act of violence, and because it's not going to make her forget about her rape. It's only going to have her, pushing her into the hands of an abortionist who profits off of her despair, who financially profits from that. It will only make her question and wonder for the rest of her life who her child could have been. The other thing she's going to need beyond support is justice. She needs her perpetrator to be punished to the fullest extent of the law. I find it ironic that the Supreme Court doesn't allow even rapists to receive the death penalty, not even child rapists. But yet the child is put to death for the crimes of his father. That doesn't make logical sense. If you think about my father would go out today and commit a rape or commit an act of terrorism. There would be no one in our society on CNN or MSNBC, well, maybe MSNBC, but no one in a logical society would argue that I or my sister should be put to death for my father's crimes. And when I bring that up on campuses, students innately go back to, of course not. No one would argue that. And I say, well, why? Why can't you argue that I should be put to death for my father's crimes? And they say, well, it's because you're a living, breathing human being. And so that question always goes back to, what is it? What is that child in the womb? Is it simply a clump of alien cells, or is it a member of our species that deserves protection? And thirdly, I would say that beyond the support and the justice, I think it's a very regressive view to hold that because someone was conceived in rape, therefore they're less valuable. I just had a good friend of mine, Ryan Bomberg, on my podcast the other week. He was conceived in rape. His mother courageously chose to place him with an adoptive family. He considers his mother, who he's never met, doesn't know, a hero. But I think it's actually a regressive view, because we was thinking about this the other day, like there was a period in time in our world that if you were conceived out of wedlock, you were a bastard. You couldn't inherit property. You couldn't do certain things. You couldn't be at certain places because you were who your father was and who your father was married to at the time you were conceived. This is exactly what we're literally seeing argued on MSNBC and CNN right now as we await the pending Dobbs decision, is that children conceived in rape. And by the way, there are thousands. The view is that like every single woman who's raped suddenly gets pregnant. That's not true. About 5% of women who are raped, who survive rape, become pregnant. Half of those women actually choose life. So there are literally tens of thousands of people walking around here in America today who were conceived in rape, who we're literally arguing their lives don't have any value.
Excellent work. I definitely recommend people check out KristanHawkins.com. The podcast is explicitly pro-life. You'll get excellent gems like a very confident college student coming up saying, why don't you focus on these women who are already in shelters? And Ms. Hawkins will just say, is it all right that the American Diabetes Association doesn't focus on cancer? And then the student will be humbled for the first time in their life, coming up with something they haven't heard before. Links will be in the description below. Thanks to everyone for watching the Libertarian Institute. Ms. Hawkins, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me. Have a great day.